Most people believe success is about adding more effort, more strategies, more knowledge, more opportunities. They chase new ideas. They search for better methods. They keep looking for something extra that will finally change everything. But despite all of this, they remain in the same place, not because they are not trying, but because they are carrying too much of what holds them back. The truth is simple. Success is not only built by what you add, it is built by what you remove, because every negative thought you keep weakens your confidence. Every distraction you allow breaks your focus. Every excuse you repeat delays your progress. And over time, these small things accumulate. They create resistance, not visible, not obvious, but powerful enough to slow down everything you are trying to build. Most people never realize this. They try to improve their results without addressing what is blocking them. They push harder. They work longer. They search for new solutions, but they ignore the weight they are carrying. And that weight keeps pulling them back. Think about it. If your mind is filled with doubt, how will you take action with confidence? If your environment is filled with negativity, how will you stay motivated? If your habits are inconsistent, how will you create steady progress? You cannot build something strong on a weak foundation, and that foundation is shaped by what you allow to remain in your life. This is where real change begins, not by adding more complexity, but by removing what is unnecessary, what is harmful, what is holding you in the same cycle. Because when you eliminate resistance, everything becomes clearer. Your thinking sharpens, your focus strengthens, your actions become more direct, and progress becomes faster, not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer being slowed down. This is the principle most people overlook. They believe success requires constant addition, but in reality, it often requires disciplined elimination, cutting what does not serve you, letting go of what drains you, removing what weakens your direction. And this process is not easy, because what holds you back often feels familiar, comfortable, justified. Negative thinking can feel like realism. Toxic environments can feel normal. Excuses can feel valid. But familiarity does not mean it is beneficial. And comfort does not mean it is helping you grow. To move forward, you must be willing to challenge what you have accepted, to question your patterns, to remove what no longer supports your progress. Because every time you cut something that limits you, you create space for better thinking, better habits, better decisions, and that space is where growth begins. This is not about doing everything at once. It is about removing one limitation at a time, one pattern, one distraction, one excuse, until what remains is clear, focused, effective. Because when you remove what is holding you back, you do not need to force progress. It happens naturally, and that is where real transformation begins. Not in adding more, but in finally letting go of what you no longer need. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Cut negative thinking immediately. Every result in your life begins with a thought. Before action, there is interpretation. Before progress, there is belief. Before success, there is a mindset shaping every decision you make. And if that mindset is negative, everything slows down. Negative thinking is not just an emotion. It is a pattern. A pattern that quietly influences how you see yourself, how you interpret challenges, and how you respond to opportunities. It tells you that you are not ready, that you are not capable, that the risk is too high, that failure is inevitable. And the most dangerous part? Feels real. Because negative thoughts often sound logical. They present themselves as caution, as realism, as protection. But in reality, they are limitations disguised as safety. They do not protect you. They prevent you. A single negative thought may seem harmless, but repeated over time, it becomes belief. And belief shapes behavior. If you believe something will not work, you hesitate. If you hesitate, your effort weakens. If your effort weakens, your results decline. And those results reinforce the original belief. This creates a loop, a self-sustaining cycle of doubt and underperformance. And most people live inside this cycle without even realizing it. They think the problem is external. Lack of opportunity, lack of resources, lack of support. But the deeper issue often begins internally, with the thoughts they allow to repeat. Negative thinking affects more than just confidence. It affects perception. You begin to notice problems more than possibilities. You focus on obstacles instead of solutions. You interpret setbacks as failures instead of feedback. And this shift in perception changes how you act. You avoid challenges. You delay decisions. You settle for less than what you are capable of achieving. Not because you cannot do more, but because your thinking has already decided the outcome. This is why controlling your thoughts is not optional. It is essential, because your mind is constantly generating interpretations. And if you do not direct it, it will default to patterns it is used to. Patterns built from past experiences, fears, and conditioning. So the question is not, do you have negative thoughts? Everyone does. The real question is, do you accept them without question? Or do you challenge them? Because the moment you begin to question your thoughts, you create distance. Distance between what you think and what is true. For example, a thought appears. This will not work. Instead of accepting it, you pause. You ask, based on what? Is this fact or assumption? What evidence supports this? Most negative thoughts collapse under scrutiny, not because they are completely false, but because they are incomplete. They ignore possibilities. They exaggerate risks. They focus on worst-case outcomes. And when you recognize this, their power weakens. Another important step is replacing passive thinking with intentional thinking. Instead of allowing your mind to drift into doubt, you redirect it toward constructive interpretation. Not unrealistic positivity, but controlled perspective. Instead of thinking, I am not ready, you shift to, I can prepare. Instead of, this is too difficult, you think, this will require effort, but it is possible. This shift may seem small, but it changes your response. And your response determines your action. Action is what breaks negative thinking, not reflection alone, because thinking without action keeps you in the same loop. But action, even small action, creates evidence, and evidence reshapes belief. When you act despite doubt, you prove something to yourself, that you can move forward even when you are uncertain. That progress does not require perfect confidence. It requires decision. This is how negative thinking loses control. Not by eliminating it completely, but by refusing to let it dictate your behavior. Another key factor is awareness. You must become aware of the patterns your mind repeats. Do you focus on what could go wrong? Do you assume failure before trying? Do you compare yourself negatively to others? These patterns are not random. They are habits, and like any habit, they can be changed, but only if you recognize them first. Once you become aware, you begin to interrupt them. You catch the thought, you question it, you redirect it, and over time a new pattern forms. One that supports action instead of blocking it. One that builds clarity instead of confusion. Because success is not just about external strategy. It is about internal alignment. Your thoughts, your actions, and your direction must work together. And that begins with control over your thinking. When you cut negative thinking, you remove a major source of resistance. You reduce hesitation. You increase focus. You create space for better decisions. And once that space is created, everything becomes easier. Not because the path changes, but because your perception of it does. And that is where real progress begins. Chapter 2: Cut toxic people from your environment. Your environment is not neutral. It is shaping you. Every conversation you engage in, every opinion you listen to, every attitude you are exposed to, all of it influences how you think, how you feel, and how you act. And the most powerful part of your environment is not where you live. It is who you surround yourself with, because people transfer energy, not in a vague or abstract way, but in a very real, psychological sense. They influence your standards. They influence your beliefs. They influence what you consider normal. If you spend time around people who complain constantly, you begin to see problems more easily. If you are surrounded by people who avoid responsibility, you start justifying your own inaction. If those around you settle for less, your ambition slowly adjusts to match that level. Not because you chose it consciously, but because repetition creates acceptance. and acceptance becomes your new baseline. This is why toxic people are so dangerous, not because they are obviously harmful, but because their influence is gradual, subtle, almost invisible at first. They do not always attack your goals directly. They question them. They minimize them. They joke about them. They plant doubt in small, repeated ways. You think that will work? That's too risky. Why not just stay where you are? These statements may seem harmless, but over time they weaken your conviction. They create hesitation, and hesitation slows progress. Toxicity is not always loud. Sometimes, it appears as negativity disguised as realism, or criticism disguised as concern, or discouragement disguised as advice. And if you are not aware, you begin to internalize these perspectives. You start thinking the same way. You start limiting yourself without realizing it. Another form of toxicity is emotional draining. Some people constantly bring problems without solutions. They seek attention, not growth. They repeat the same struggles but take no action to change them. And while supporting others is important, constant exposure to unresolved negativity can exhaust your mental energy. Energy that could have been used for your own progress. Because focus requires mental clarity. And clarity is difficult to maintain in a draining environment. There is also subtle competition. People who feel uncomfortable with your growth. Not because they dislike you, but because your progress reflects their stagnation. So instead of supporting you, they unconsciously try to pull you back. They question your decisions. They highlight risks excessively. They remind you of past failures. Not to help you, but to keep you at a level they are comfortable with. This is not always intentional, but the effect is real. And if you stay in that environment long enough, your growth slows down. Not because you lack ability, but because your environment does not support expansion. This is why you must be selective, not judgmental, but intentional. You do not need to remove everyone who disagrees with you. You do not need to isolate yourself. But you must recognize who consistently adds value and who consistently removes it. A simple question can guide you. After interacting with this person, do I feel stronger or weaker? Stronger in mindset, stronger in clarity, stronger in motivation, or weaker, doubtful, drained, uncertain. Your answer reveals their influence. And influence over time shapes direction. Cutting toxic people does not always mean confrontation. It does not require conflict. Sometimes, it is simply distance. Less time, less engagement, less exposure. You adjust your boundaries, quietly, without unnecessary explanation, because your responsibility is not to manage everyone. It is to protect your environment. At the same time, you must actively replace what you remove, because eliminating negativity creates space. But that space must be filled intentionally, with people who challenge you constructively, who support your growth, who hold you accountable, who speak honestly but not destructively. These individuals do not always agree with you, but they push you forward. They expand your thinking instead of limiting it. They encourage action instead of reinforcing fear. And being around such people changes your standards. You begin to see what is possible. You begin to think differently. You begin to act at a higher level, because your environment now supports growth, not stagnation. Another important realization is this. You cannot expect to grow in an environment that rewards staying the same. Growth requires friction, change, discomfort. And if the people around you resist that change, you will feel pressure to remain where you are. This pressure is subtle, but it is powerful. And if you ignore it, it will hold you back. So you must decide, not based on emotion, not based on obligation, but based on direction. Who aligns with where you are going? Who supports the version of yourself you are building? And who consistently pulls you away from it? The answer to that question determines your environment. And your environment determines your trajectory. Because success is not achieved in isolation. It is influenced by what surrounds you daily. When you cut toxic people, you are not being harsh. You are being strategic. You are removing resistance. You are protecting your focus. You are creating space for growth. And once that space is clear, your progress accelerates. Not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer being held back by what surrounds you. Chapter 3: Cut procrastination and start now. Procrastination is not laziness. It is delay with justification. A quiet agreement you make with yourself to act later, while knowing that later rarely comes. I'll start tomorrow. I need more time. I'm not ready yet. These thoughts feel reasonable. They sound responsible. But they create distance between intention and action. And that distance is where progress disappears. Most people believe they procrastinate because they lack discipline. But the truth is deeper. Procrastination is often driven by emotion. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of uncertainty. When a task feels uncomfortable, the mind looks for relief. And the easiest form of relief is delay. You postpone the action. You shift your attention. You convince yourself that waiting is better. But waiting does not remove discomfort. It extends it, because the task remains unfinished, unresolved, unmoved. And over time, that unfinished state creates pressure. Mental pressure. You think about it repeatedly. You feel guilty for not starting. You lose confidence in your ability to follow through. This is how procrastination weakens you. Not just in results, but in self-trust. Because every time you delay something important, you send a message to yourself. I don't follow through. And when that message repeats, it becomes belief. You begin to doubt your own discipline, your own consistency, your own ability to act. This is why cutting procrastination is critical. Not just for productivity, but for identity. Because action builds confidence, and delay destroys it. The first step is understanding this. You will never feel fully ready. Readiness is not a prerequisite for action. It is a result of action. Most people wait for clarity before they begin. They want the perfect plan, the right timing, the complete understanding. But clarity comes from movement, not from waiting. When you start, even imperfectly, something shifts. You gain feedback. You see what works and what doesn't. You adjust. And through that process, clarity develops. But if you wait for clarity before starting, you remain stuck. Because the information you need only appears after you begin. Another important principle is this. Action reduces fear. Not the other way around. Most people believe they need confidence before they act. But confidence is built through action. Every small step you take weakens resistance. Every completed task strengthens momentum. And momentum changes everything. Because once you are moving, continuing becomes easier. The hardest part is not the work. It is the start. This is why you must lower the barrier to action. Do not focus on completing the entire task. Focus on starting. If something feels overwhelming, break it down. Instead of thinking, I need to finish this, think, I will begin for 5 minutes. Just 5. No pressure. No expectation. Because starting is the trigger. Once you begin, the resistance decreases. And often those 5 minutes turn into more. Not because you forced yourself, but because you overcame the initial barrier. Another key factor is eliminating unnecessary thinking. Procrastination thrives in overthinking. You analyze too much. You consider too many possibilities. You imagine outcomes before taking action. And this creates mental fatigue before any real work is done. The solution is simple. Decide quickly. Act immediately. Not recklessly, but without unnecessary delay. If something is important and within your control, act on it. Do not give your mind time to create excuses. Because the longer you wait, the stronger those excuses become. Environment also plays a role. If your surroundings are filled with distractions, starting becomes harder. You are constantly pulled away. Your focus is fragmented. This makes delay easier and action more difficult. So you must design your environment for action. Remove distractions. Simplify your workspace. Create conditions that support focus. Because discipline is easier when resistance is reduced. There is also the concept of accountability. When your actions affect only you, it is easier to delay. But when others are involved, your commitment increases. Deadlines, commitments, public goals. These create pressure. Not negative pressure, but constructive pressure. They reduce the space for procrastination. Because now, Inaction has visible consequences. However, the most powerful form of accountability is internal, keeping promises to yourself, following through on what you decide. Because every time you act when you said you would, you reinforce trust in yourself. And that trust builds discipline naturally. You no longer rely on motivation. You rely on consistency. As you begin to cut procrastination, you will notice something important. Your perception of time changes. You stop feeling like you are always behind. You stop carrying unfinished tasks in your mind. You become more present, more focused, more in control. Because action resolves uncertainty, and resolution creates clarity. Procrastination keeps everything open, uncertain, incomplete. But action closes that gap. It moves things forward. And forward movement is what creates progress. Not planning alone, not thinking alone, but doing. So the next time you feel the urge to delay, pause, recognize it, and act anyway. Not perfectly, not completely, but immediately. Because success does not come from waiting for the right moment. It comes from using the moment you have. And once you develop the habit of starting, you remove one of the biggest obstacles to progress, and everything begins to move faster, clear, forward. Chapter 4. Cut fear by taking action. Fear feels real. It creates tension in your body. It fills your mind with doubt. It presents images of failure, rejection, and loss. And because it feels so convincing, most people treat it as truth. They listen to it. They obey it. They allow it to decide what they will and will not do. But fear is not always a signal of danger. More often, it is a signal of growth. It appears when you step outside what is familiar, when you attempt something uncertain, when you move towards something that matters. And instead of recognizing it as part of the process, most people retreat. They avoid the action. They delay the decision. They stay within what feels safe. But safety has a cost. It limits expansion. It restricts opportunity. It keeps you in the same position, repeating the same patterns. Because growth and comfort do not exist together. To move forward, you must accept discomfort. And fear is one of the most common forms of that discomfort. The problem is not fear itself. The problem is how you respond to it. If you avoid fear, it grows. It becomes stronger, more convincing, more dominant. Because avoidance reinforces the idea that the fear is valid. You tell yourself, this is dangerous. I should stay away. And your mind accepts that as truth. But when you face fear, something different happens. It weakens. Not instantly, not completely, but noticeably. Because action challenges the assumption behind the fear. You begin to see that what you imagined is not as overwhelming as it seemed. Or that even if it is difficult, it is manageable. This is why action is the most effective way to reduce fear. Not thinking. Not waiting. Action. Consider this. If you are afraid of failure, avoiding action guarantees no progress. But taking action gives you two outcomes. You either succeed or you learn. Both move you forward. Fear tries to convince you that failure is final. But in reality, failure is feedback. It shows you what needs adjustment. It provides information you did not have before. And that information improves your next attempt. So fear is not protecting you from failure. It is preventing you from learning. Another important aspect of fear is exaggeration. The mind often amplifies potential outcomes. It creates worst-case scenarios. It focuses on what could go wrong. And it repeats those images until they feel certain. But most of these scenarios never happen. They exist only in thought. And yet, they influence real decisions. This is the power of unchallenged fear. It controls behavior without evidence. To counter this, you must bring fear into reality. Instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? What is the actual risk? What is the likely outcome? What can I do if it doesn't work? These questions reduce exaggeration. They bring clarity. And clarity reduces emotional intensity. Because fear thrives in uncertainty. The more unknown something feels, the stronger fear becomes. But when you define the situation clearly, fear loses its ambiguity. It becomes specific. And specific problems can be managed. Another key principle is gradual exposure. You do not need to eliminate fear in one step. You reduce it through repeated action. Small steps. Consistent effort. Each time you face what you fear, your tolerance increases. Your confidence builds. Not because fear disappears completely, but because you prove to yourself that you can act despite it. This is real confidence. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward anyway. There is also a deeper layer to fear. Sometimes it is not about failure. It is about identity. Fear of being judged. Fear of being seen differently. Fear of not meeting expectations. These fears are connected to perception. How others see you. How you see yourself. And they can be powerful, because they affect more than just action. They affect self-image. But here is the reality. You cannot control how others perceive you. You can only control your actions. And if you allow fear of judgment to guide your decisions, you limit your potential. Because you are acting based on external perception, not internal direction. When you shift your focus back to action, something changes. You stop trying to protect your image. You start building your capability. And capability creates results. Results create confidence. And confidence changes perception, both yours and others. Fear also decreases with familiarity. What feels intimidating today becomes normal tomorrow, if you face it repeatedly. The first step is always the hardest. The first attempt feels uncertain. But each repetition reduces resistance, until what once felt difficult becomes routine. This is how growth happens. Not through one major breakthrough, but through consistent exposure to discomfort, and choosing action each time. As you begin to cut fear by taking action, you will notice a shift. You stop waiting for fear to disappear. You start acting with it present. And that changes everything. Because now, fear is no longer in control. It becomes background. A signal, not a command. And you remain in motion. Forward. Consistently. Deliberately. Because you understand something most people do not. Fear is not the obstacle. Avoidance is. And once you remove avoidance, fear loses its power. And progress becomes inevitable. Chapter 5. Cut excuses and take responsibility. Excuses are comfortable. They explain delay. They justify inaction. They protect you from discomfort. And that is exactly why they are dangerous. Because every excuse you accept removes responsibility. And without responsibility, there is no control. You begin to believe that your situation is determined by external factors. Time, money, circumstances, other people. You tell yourself, I can't do this because of that. And in that moment, you give away your ability to act. Because if the cause is external, the solution feels out of your hands. This creates passivity, waiting, dependence, and over time, it builds a mindset where progress feels impossible. But the truth is different. Most limitations are not absolute. They are constraints. And constraints can be managed, adjusted, worked around, overcome with effort and strategy. But only if you take responsibility. Responsibility is not about blame. It is about ownership. Ownership of your decisions, your actions, your direction. When you take responsibility, your focus shifts. Instead of asking, why can't I do this? You ask, what can I do with what I have? The shift is powerful, because it moves you from problem-focused thinking to solution-focused thinking. And solutions create movement. Excuses stop it. Consider the most common excuses. I don't have enough time. In reality, time is not lacking. It is allocated. Everyone has the same hours in a day. The difference is how those hours are used. Time spent on distractions, on low-value activities, on avoidance. These are choices. And when you recognize them as choices, you regain control. You can reorganize, prioritize, adjust. But only if you stop using time as an excuse. Another common one. I don't have enough money. Money can be a real constraint, but it is rarely the final barrier. There are ways to start small, to learn, to build gradually. Many successful paths begin with limited resources. What matters is not the amount you start with, but how you use it. If you wait for perfect conditions, you will wait indefinitely. Because perfect conditions do not exist. Excuses often appear as reasons. They sound logical. They feel valid. But their function is the same: to delay action, to avoid discomfort, to maintain the current state. And the current state, if unchanged, produces the same results. This is why excuses are so limiting. They keep you in place. Another subtle form of excuse is external blame. Blaming others, blaming circumstances, blaming past experiences. These may all have influenced your situation, but they do not define your future. When you focus on blame, you focus on what you cannot control, and that removes your ability to change anything. But when you take responsibility, you focus on what you can control: your response, your effort, your next step. This does not mean ignoring reality. It means working within it, using what is available, and moving forward anyway. Responsibility also requires honesty. You must be honest about your own patterns. Where are you avoiding effort? Where are you delaying action? Where are you choosing comfort over progress? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary, because awareness is the first step to change. Once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. You can replace excuses with decisions. Instead of saying, "I don't have time," you say, "This is not a priority right now." This reframing is important because it removes the illusion. It forces you to acknowledge your choice. And once you see it as a choice, you can change it. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," you say, "I don't know how yet." This shifts your mindset from limitation to learning, from fixed to flexible, because not knowing is temporary, but deciding not to try makes it permanent. Another key aspect is accountability, holding yourself responsible for your actions, not occasionally, consistently, following through on commitments, completing what you start, not because someone else is watching, but because you are building trust with yourself. And self-trust is essential, because if you do not trust your own actions, you will hesitate. You will doubt your decisions. You will rely on external validation. But when you take responsibility consistently, something changes. You begin to rely on yourself. You know that when you decide something, you will act on it. And that creates confidence. Real confidence. Not based on words, but on evidence. Taking responsibility also simplifies your path. You stop looking for complex explanations. You stop overanalyzing obstacles. You focus on what can be done next. The next step. The next action. The next improvement. And this forward focus creates momentum, because progress is built step by step, not all at once. Excuses interrupt that process. Responsibility sustains it. As you begin to cut excuses, you will notice resistance. Your mind will try to justify old patterns. It will offer reasons to delay, to avoid, to stay comfortable. But each time you choose action instead, you weaken that pattern. You build a new one, a pattern of ownership, of decision, of movement. And over time, that pattern becomes your default. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for conditions. You start creating outcomes, because you understand something fundamental. Your progress is not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by how you respond. And when you take full responsibility for that response, you regain control. And control is where real progress begins. Chapter 6: Cut bad habits that drain your potential. Your life is not shaped by what you do occasionally. It is shaped by what you do daily. Small actions, repeated consistently, quietly building outcomes over time. These repeated actions become habits, and habits determine direction, not intention, not motivation, but behavior you perform automatically. This is why bad habits are so dangerous, because they do not feel significant in the moment. They feel small, harmless, easy to justify. 1 hour of distraction, one skipped task, one delay. Individually, they seem insignificant, but repeated daily, they compound. They consume time. They weaken focus. They reduce discipline. And over time, they shape a version of your life that does not match your potential. The problem is not just the habit itself. It is the pattern it creates. A pattern of inconsistency, of avoidance, of low standards. Because every habit reinforces identity. If you repeatedly choose distraction, you reinforce a distracted identity. If you repeatedly delay action, you reinforce a pattern of inaction. And once identity is formed, behavior follows it automatically. This is why cutting bad habits is not just about stopping behavior. It is about changing patterns, replacing them with actions that support growth. The first step is awareness. You must identify which habits are draining your potential. Not the obvious ones alone, but the subtle ones. Scrolling without purpose, checking your phone repeatedly, starting tasks but not finishing them. These habits are not dramatic, but they fragment your attention. They reduce your ability to focus deeply. And focus is essential for progress. Another common habit is inconsistency. Starting with energy, stopping without completion. This creates a cycle. You begin something. You lose momentum. You restart later. But each restart requires energy. And over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. Because you are always beginning, but rarely progressing. Consistency solves this. Not intensity, not perfection, but steady, repeated effort. Even small actions done daily create results. Because consistency compounds. Another habit that drains potential is comfort seeking. Choosing easy over necessary. Choosing entertainment over effort. Choosing immediate satisfaction over long-term benefit. This habit feels rewarding in the moment, but it delays growth. Because growth requires discomfort, focus, effort, discipline. And if you constantly avoid discomfort, you avoid progress. Breaking this habit requires a shift in perspective. You must stop seeing discomfort as something negative and start seeing it as a signal that you are doing something that matters, something that will create improvement. Another important factor is environment. Habits are not just personal. They are influenced by surroundings. If your environment is filled with distractions, bad habits become easier. If your environment supports focus, good habits become natural. So you must design your environment intentionally. Remove triggers for bad habits. Reduce access to distractions. Create spaces that encourage productive behavior. Because willpower is limited, but environment is controllable. When you reduce friction for good habits and increase friction for bad ones, behavior changes more easily. There is also the concept of replacement. You cannot simply remove a habit. You must replace it, because habits fill space, time, energy, attention. If you remove a habit without replacing it, the space remains empty, and eventually the old habit returns. So instead of just stopping a behavior, introduce a new one. If you reduce time on distractions, replace it with focused work. If you remove unproductive routines, replace them with structured ones. This creates continuity, and continuity builds stability. Another key principle is identity-based habits. Instead of focusing only on what you do, focus on who you are becoming. A disciplined person does not rely on motivation. They follow structure. A focused person does not chase every distraction. They prioritize. When you begin to see yourself in this way, your behavior aligns naturally. Because actions follow identity. If you believe you are someone who completes tasks, you act accordingly. If you believe you are someone who avoids effort, your behavior reflects that. So changing habits requires changing self-perception. Not through words, but through repeated action. Every time you follow through, you reinforce a new identity. And over time, that identity becomes stable. Another important factor is tracking. What gets measured gets improved. When you track your habits, you create awareness. You see patterns. You notice consistency, or the lack of it. And this visibility increases accountability. You are no longer guessing. You are observing. And observation leads to adjustment. As you begin to cut bad habits, progress may feel slow at first. Because habits are deeply ingrained. They have been repeated many times. But with consistency they weaken. New habits take their place. And over time, your daily actions begin to align with your goals. This is where real change happens. Not in one moment, but in repeated behavior. Day after day. Choice after choice. Because success is not built in a single decision. It is built in daily discipline. And discipline is simply the result of strong habits. When you remove habits that drain your potential, you remove resistance. You free up time. You increase focus. You create space for meaningful work. And once that space is used effectively, your progress accelerates. Not because you are doing something extraordinary, but because you are no longer being held back by what you do repeatedly. And that is where your true potential begins to show. Chapter 7. Cut lack of focus and choose one path. Most people are not failing because they lack ability. They are failing because their attention is divided. Too many goals. Too many ideas. Too many directions. They start one thing, then shift to another, then chase something new. And in the process, nothing reaches completion. This is the cost of scattered focus. It creates activity without progress, movement without direction, effort without results. Because attention is a limited resource. And when it is spread across too many targets, its impact weakens. Imagine trying to dig 10 shallow holes. You put in effort, you spend time, but you never go deep enough to reach anything meaningful. Now compare that to digging one hole with full focus. Depth is created. Results appear. This is the difference between distraction and focus. Focus is not just about working hard. It is about directing your energy toward one clear objective and staying with it long enough to see results. But this is where most people struggle, because choosing one path requires letting go of others, and letting go feels like loss. What if I miss something better? What if this is not the right choice? So instead of committing, they keep multiple options open. They move between them. They delay decision. And in doing so, they remain stuck. Because progress requires commitment, not endless consideration. At some point you must decide. Not perfectly, but deliberately. You choose a direction based on what you know now. And you commit to it. Because clarity does not come before commitment. It comes after. As you take action, you learn. You adjust. You refine your path. But without initial focus, that learning never happens. Another important aspect is depth. Shallow effort produces shallow results. Deep focus produces meaningful outcomes. When you concentrate on one goal, you develop skill, understanding, efficiency. You improve faster because your attention is not fragmented. Every hour you invest builds on the previous one. This creates momentum, and momentum accelerates progress. But when your focus is divided, each effort is isolated. You start over repeatedly. You lose continuity. And without continuity, progress slows down. Distraction is the main enemy of focus. Not just external distractions, but internal ones. New ideas, new opportunities, new possibilities. They appear constantly, and they are tempting, because they feel exciting. They promise faster results, better outcomes, but most of them are distractions, not because they are bad, but because they pull you away from what you have already started. Every time you switch, you reset your progress. You lose time. You lose momentum. And over time, this pattern becomes costly. This is why discipline and focus is critical. You must learn to ignore what is not aligned with your current path. Not forever, but for now. Because focus is not about doing everything. It is about doing what matters most. Another key principle is prioritization. Not all tasks are equal. Some create results. Others create activity. You must identify what actually moves you forward and prioritize those actions. This requires clarity. What is your main objective? What actions directly contribute to it? What can be removed or delayed? When you answer these questions, your focus becomes sharper. You stop wasting time on low-impact tasks. You concentrate on what produces outcomes. There is also the concept of deep work. Working without interruption. Fully engaged. Fully present. This type of focus is rare, but it is powerful. Because in deep work, your output increases. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your efficiency improves. And the quality of your work rises. But deep work requires structure. You must create time blocks where distractions are eliminated. No interruptions. No multitasking. Just focused effort. Even a few hours of deep work can produce more results than an entire day of scattered attention. Another challenge is impatience. People expect quick results. And when they do not see immediate progress, they switch paths. They assume something else will work better. But success often requires time. consistent effort over a sustained period. And without patience, focus breaks. You move on before results appear, and then repeat the cycle. Start, stop, switch. This pattern prevents progress, because results are built through persistence, not constant change. As you begin to cut lack of focus, you will notice a shift. Your work becomes more structured. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your actions become more intentional. You stop chasing everything. You start building something. And that difference is significant, because building requires depth, consistency, commitment. And once you commit to one path, something happens. Your energy aligns. Your efforts compound. Your progress becomes visible, not instantly, but steadily. And steady progress leads to real results, because success is not about doing many things at once. It is about doing the right thing long enough for it to work. So choose your path, not perfectly, but decisively. Commit to it, focus on it, and stay with it, because once your attention is no longer divided, your potential becomes concentrated, and concentrated effort creates powerful results. Most people spend their lives trying to add more ideas, more effort, more plans. They believe that if they just find the right strategy, the right opportunity, the right moment, everything will change. But they overlook something far more important: what they need to remove. Because progress is not just about what you build. It is about what you stop carrying. Every negative thought you keep slows your decisions. Every toxic influence you tolerate weakens your mindset. Every excuse you repeat delays your action. Every distraction you allow breaks your focus. And every bad habit you ignore drains your potential. These are not small things. They are silent obstacles. They do not announce themselves. They do not demand attention, but they quietly shape your results, day after day, choice after choice. And as long as they remain, progress will always feel harder than it should be. This is why success is not complicated. It is precise. It requires awareness, the ability to see what is helping you and what is holding you back. And once you see it clearly, the next step becomes obvious. You remove it, not slowly, not eventually, but decisively. Because every delay in removing what limits you is a delay in becoming who you are capable of being. When you begin to eliminate what does not serve you, something shifts. Your mind becomes clearer. You think with less noise. You act with less hesitation. You focus with more intensity. Because the resistance is gone. You are no longer fighting against yourself. And that changes everything. You stop feeling stuck. You stop overthinking every step. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. Because you are no longer weighed down by what was holding you back. Instead, you move forward. Directly. Consistently. With purpose. And over time, those small changes compound. One removed habit leads to better discipline. One removed distraction leads to deeper focus. One removed excuse leads to stronger action. And these improvements begin to stack, until your entire approach to life shifts, not through one big breakthrough, but through repeated elimination. This is the real path to growth, not constant addition, but disciplined removal. Because when you remove what is unnecessary, what remains becomes powerful. Your effort becomes more effective. Your direction becomes clearer. Your progress becomes faster. And most importantly, you become more aligned. Aligned with your goals. Aligned with your actions. Aligned with the person you are trying to become. So now the question is simple. Not what you need to add, but what you need to cut. What thought needs to go. What habit needs to stop. What distraction needs to be removed. Because the moment you make that decision, everything begins to change. Not all at once, but step by step, choice by choice. Until one day you realize something important. You are no longer stuck. You are no longer waiting. You're moving. And that movement is what creates success.